Look, y'all have heard me say that the NFL draft or this week is my Christmas. And if it's my Christmas, I'm about to talk to Santa Claus. Josh Norris from Underdog Fantasy is the guy who makes a list, checks it twice, and if you don't know, you need to get familiar because his mock drafts are gospel throughout the industry. I know what I'll be doing is refreshing and checking the internet Wednesday at midnight. Josh, is that the last one?
You nailed it, my man. It's been a fun ride. A couple years ago, and this might be where you're leading, back in 2021, when that was previously the most unpredictable draft of all time. Somehow I was able to piece together, do some dot connecting, and nail 16 of 32 picks that year. So some might call it the most accurate mock draft of all time. You know,
it is. Not only did you get 16 picks right, you got 27 of the 32 players picked in the first round. So that is the gold standard for accuracy when it comes to mock drafts. The most inexact science, somehow you were damn near perfect. And I definitely want to get into that process, into your process in general. But we just talked to Bryce Young, and I want to start there. I want to start at the top because, first of all, you and your partner Hayden Winks over at Underdog Fantasy at the Underdog Football Show, you guys are doing God's work with these prospect videos, okay, that I've just been like obsessed with. All right, it is gold. What a gift that is. And at the end of the Bryce Young video, you said you had about 2 pages of notes that you didn't get to. And so, so I'm wondering, I guess I'll ask it to you this way. What else needs to be said at this point about Bryce Young, or what, in your opinion, isn't said often enough or loud enough about the presumptive '1 overall pick to the Panthers?
You know, that's a great question. And I'll try to repeat a phrase that I said during that time. You know, because of his stature at 5'10", and let's just say 204 pounds, which is what he weighed in at, right? The entire conversation seems to be what he did at the college level is not going to work at the NFL level in terms of the creativity, in terms of the playmaking, even though he was stellar at that in college football. The other part of that conversation, because I think you can't talk about Bryce Young and not discuss these other quarterbacks. Let's just bring up CJ Stroud, since throughout this process, he's been linked to quarterback 2, and maybe we'll get into that a little bit. Yep. What he was bad at the college level was dealing with disruption and pressure and creativity outside of that. But because of his size, there's optimism on top of that Georgia game and the Northwestern game that he can be better at it. So it's almost people are assuming that what Bryce is the king of is not going to work. Whereas CJ Stroud, it's like, oh, he just has to get better in this one area. Do you know what I mean? Like, the conversation of connecting the
people
two.
Moving the goalposts. They're just trying to make, it feels like it just comes back to the size. If you can't get past the size, you're going to find reasons to not believe that he can thrive despite his lack of stature.
Exactly. Bryce is such, and while the playmaking and creativity is #1 that stands out for him, I also believe that people need to go back and watch this year's Alabama team and realize the miscommunications, the disruption, the offensive line was so much worse than what we are used to of previous Alabama teams. And he didn't have the dudes he has been throwing to in previous years as well. And just his ability to read pre-snap and post-snap and get the ball when the structure of the play is good is also stellar on top of that. So it's almost, hey, we get him in structure, we get him outside of structure. What else more could you want other than him being 6'2"?
Yeah, and he's not gonna get any taller. There's nothing he can do about that. But he's been successful in spite of that at every level. I'm a believer. If for no other reason that his favorite movie is Paid in Full, that sold me. If I was skeptical, once he told me his favorite movie is Paid in Full and started quoting it, I'm like, this guy has got all the intangibles you could ask for. But you mentioned C.J. Stroud. I want to get to him, and I'm going to go through all these quarterbacks and a lot more.
Sweet.
How does C.J. Stroud go from, once the Panthers moved up to 1, the guy that was the perfect fit for Frank Reich, he's only worked with quarterbacks of a certain height and a certain build, and he's the cleanest, he's the guy with the fewest amount of questions, and he aced the test that was that Georgia defense, and all of a sudden, whether it's the S2 or any other reason, it's like now all of a sudden C.J. Stroud may be the last quarterback in the green room. Let the rumor mill tell it. How did we get here with C.J. Stroud?
It's a great question. Not to pat our channel and our show on the back a little bit here.
Oh, please plug it.
I kind of think that me doing episodes with Josh McCown all season long, and then in January, him sitting down and evaluating these at the time top 3 quarterbacks. We didn't get to we didn't get to Anthony Richardson. The most animated I saw him was his breakdown of CJ Stroud against Georgia. And that led me to believe, as soon as Josh got hired as the Panthers quarterbacks coach, that if he was to list a board, it would be CJ Stroud and Bryce Young 1 and 2, and it wouldn't be Will Levis even close to that, right? So maybe with these early markets and early movers, CJ Stroud, that is the reason why he was listed as quarterback 1. But I think his on-field play absolutely warrants that, in terms of, and you've watched this, Michael, in terms of his ability and placement at all 3 levels of the field, and like at each quarter of the field too, is simply stunning, and I can't answer to what you are of why this process is different. I think why it might be different is maybe the Texans, for a multitude of reasons, are out on him, and that's why we're not getting the pick 1 and pick 2 of quarterbacks. Because if that was the case, and let's say when the Panthers were considering and making offers for the trade during the combine for picks 1 and 2, that was with it in mind of, hey, it's Bryce Young or CJ Stroud, and we'll just let the process play itself out. But it wouldn't be shocking at all to me if we get Bryce at 1, Texans don't take a quarterback at 2, and then we get to pick number 3 and like the Las Vegas Raiders or another team trade up to him at that spot. And it kind of quiets what this weird last couple weeks has been for CJ Stroud and like the public perception of it.
Speaking of weird, okay, the Texans, it seems like it's trending toward them not taking a quarterback. And obviously you take everything, or most things, other than your mocks, with a grain of salt this time of year. But it seems like they're going to go defensive player at 2. But Will Levis is still the betting favorite at 2. And I bring up betting. Yeah. And I know as of this morning, you had 41 draft bets down. I don't know if you got a few more in before you
do your homework,
me. And
Michael.
Well, not as much as you, but I tried to. But really, what is going on? Because like you follow this stuff a lot closer than I do from this standpoint. What is going on in the betting community? Because I saw where Levis moved from 50-1 to 20-1 to go 1 overall at PointsBet, and then DraftKings took down the first, second, and third market. What's happening here? Explain this to me, please.
This is a great question, because I often believe that people associate with lines with the intel that Vegas or these sports books have. And in terms of draft odds, that is not the case. The people who have the information, they believe, are the ones that are making the bets. And then the money down on those lines is what then moves future lines. Does that make sense? So it's not like Vegas has a phone connect inside of 31 draft rooms out there, and they're the ones that
because people out here getting suspended for gambling left and right. So it's like
right. But the people who believe they have the information are the ones that are putting down the money, and then that money getting put down on things is the stuff that is moving the lines. Does that make sense? Because I feel like that the perception of it of hey, Vegas is the one that has the information. That's totally out of whack. That is totally out of whack. So again, to your point, Levis being the quote unquote betting favorite at number 2, from my seat, it's people believing they have great information, whether from someone in a source for the Texans or someone like Lance Zierlein, who does great work and has connected the dots of Levis to the Texans, but that's not at number 2, that's at number 12, and just the assumption that maybe the owners step in and say, hey, we have to have a quarterback, and Levis is ranked as quarterback 2 on their board behind Bryce Young. And I think it's more dot connecting than anything locked in. I'm of the belief, and I would love to hear your thoughts here. I'm of the belief that they are not going to take Will Levis as the number 2 overall pick in this draft.
Yeah, I don't think so either, but I think they got to come out of this first round with a quarterback some way, somehow. And I would love to see Houston. I'll tell you what I think they should do more than what they will do. I'll leave that to you. But in terms of what they should do, if I were Houston, I wouldn't stand back and watch, because everybody in the AFC South wants what Jacksonville has. And I think the AFC South, to me, is the story of the first round of the draft. When you talk about Houston at 2, Indy at 4 for now, Tennessee at 11 and Houston again at 12.
Yeah.
They got an opportunity to really infuse a level of interest in that division that, for the most part, hasn't existed over the years. It's probably the most, respectfully, if you can be this in the NFL, most irrelevant division in the NFL. And it has been over the course of some time now. Whereas, so if I'm the Texans, I'm not letting. I get Tyree Wilson has special traits. Will Anderson was dominant at Alabama. I know the Alabama connection with DeMeco Ryans, for whatever that's worth. But I wouldn't let the Colts, or for that matter, the Titans, if they decide to be aggressive, I wouldn't let either one of those teams have their pick of these quarterbacks. I know history tells us that all these quarterbacks will not work out. That's just the unfortunate truth. But I actually I really like three of them, and I like Levis too. I would not be in the business of settling if I were the Houston Texans. And I think you can get an edge rusher at 12, maybe move up from 12 if that's possible. I know it's easier said than done. Address pass rush in other ways. I get Nick Bosa was DeMeco Ryans' bread and butter, but I love to see them go the aforementioned C.J. Stroud at 2. If not, swing for the fences and go Anthony Richardson.
So because I was coming on this show, I spent all day in the phones yesterday, Michael. I'm not going to tell you that like I have the best connections in terms of every insider out there, but some comments that I've heard recently is that in that building, they have in recent weeks opened up to the idea of playing Davis Mills for another season, a bit more than like the pre-off-season script indicated. Okay. And maybe that's because, I mean, I think it comes down to this. They wanted the number 1 overall pick, and the Panthers had to deal away DJ Moore in order to secure that number 1 overall pick. And if not, it would have been, the Bears moving to number 2, then trading with the Panthers from 2 to 9, right? So
9, yep.
I totally get where you're coming from, where they have to escape this out of with a quarterback. And I am almost of the opinion that it is more likely that they move up from pick number 12 to where the Arizona Cardinals are at number 3 and get those 2 and 3 spots and have it back to back.
Love it.
Then just sitting there at Will Levis and then and taking him at number 2 and then finding whatever defensive piece that is a much lower grade on their board than Tyree Wilson and Will Anderson at number 12.
That makes sense. Now that makes sense. And that's always what you got to account for is, movement. I mean, we're looking at it, how it's structured right now and projecting based on the current order. That's what's going to be. So although I think you pointed this out on Twitter, there haven't been many trades into the top 10 in recent years.
My gosh, your homework. A+.
I'm a fan.
I mean,
I'm a fan. What can I say? I'm a fan. I'm familiar with your work. I'm a fan.
Okay. So just to lay this out for you, and this is once the draft started. Obviously, there have been trades in the past, whether it was
right. I mean, we just
San
saw
Francisco
9 go to
moving
1.
up.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or San Francisco moving up to 3. Or even a couple of years ago, I believe that we saw the Miami Dolphins get up to that area where they could draft Jalen
Waddle. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. And that was pre-draft, which is a weird trade when you think about it, but totally worked out for them. Anyways, to go to the point you're saying, once the draft started in 2022, there were 0 trades inside the top 10. In 2021, there was 1 trade inside the top 10, and that was the Eagles jumping from 12 to 10 to get Devontae Smith. 2020, again, 0 trades inside the top 10. And 2019, 1 trade inside the top 10, and that was the Steelers jumping from 20 to 10 to get Devin Bush. So if there is a top 10 trade, it is going to be most likely at the end of the top 10. However, Michael, the Cardinals are desperate to get out of number 3. Yeah. And that is going to be a pennies on the dollar, if I'm using that phrase correctly.
Lesser deal. Yeah,
to take a much lesser deal to move out than typically where it would be in those top 5, top 7, top 8 spots.
Yeah, they need volume. They desperately need volume. So Houston picking back-to-back at 2 and 3, I like that a lot better than Houston going defense and settling at 12. Although, look, who knows? I love hitting Hooker. So I've seen Hooker projected to him at 12. And if they ended up with Hooker, I wouldn't mind that as much. So we'll see what they do. You touched on the Cardinals. I want to get to Anthony Richardson, my favorite prospect in this draft, just because of how polarizing he's been. I love the way you put it with Richardson, that he's less raw and more inexperienced. Could you say more about that, please?
So he only has 400 and something, obviously dropbacks during his career. It might be less than that if I can just bring up the numbers here. But like what, a dozen plus starts he's had. And when you go back and watch his games this year, like week 2 was Kentucky, about midseason was LSU. And he might make some mistakes early in those games where he might have like a middle of the field throw, end zone coverage that he needs to layer over the linebackers in front of the safeties. And instead of doing that, he'll run for 7 yards, or he'll not recognize a cornerback blitz, but then turn around, in the second half or in the third quarter, and then start hitting that middle of the field throw, or make them pay for a blitz that they show pre-snap and hit it for a big play. And to me, you just kind of see the downloading, the processing, and the learning in game. It's not week to week. It's not season on season. It's like series to series. It's quarter on quarter. And I know some people might say that's semantics, but I truly feel there is a difference between raw and inexperienced when you see him learning from past opportunities on the field and then hitting them the immediate next time when Florida rolls back on that same concept.
I think there's a strong I know it seems like it's going to be Bryce Young, and I love Bryce Young. Like I said, I love him even more after talking to him. Anthony Richardson, to me, especially with the incubator that the Carolina Panthers have constructed for whatever quarterback they take, when it comes, including the aforementioned your man Josh McCown, Anthony Richardson, it's easy for me to say because I'm sitting here. My job's not on the line. I'm swinging for the fences and going with a guy who could revolutionize the quarterback position. And that's saying something, given that they had the previous mold breaker in Cam Newton. I mean, Anthony Richardson, to me, and then getting to know him and talking to him and learning about his story, he was literally trained to put out fires. He studied to be a firefighter in high school. I mean, I love his makeup, and what you just spoke to, Josh, about his ability to learn and improve, not just throughout his lone season as a starter at Florida, but within games, let alone game to game. I think, why not Anthony Richardson at 1?
In another year, it would be Anthony Richardson at 1. I firmly believe that. There's a couple of things I want to hit on with what you just said, but I'll stop at each point. To your point about his background, this isn't and you can correct me if I'm wrong, a Bryce Young or CJ Stroud situation where it was going to quarterback camps at a young age. No. And so I think that's where the inexperience can come from versus the Elite 11s from, working with private quarterback coaches. Because that is such a big difference now with these quarterbacks than it was 20 years ago with these quarterback prospects, So I think we understand why he is inexperienced at this period, To your point on the perfect situation for him, I was going to save this for my show later on in our channel. I will deliver it to you right now. Just some dot connecting we can do. Okay. All right. So there is a member of the Detroit Lions front office that has become a bit more integral and ingrained to them in the last year or so. And that is John Dorsey. Obviously, many people know John Dorsey from being the Browns general manager.
Yes.
It was kind of, how when head coaches get hired for the first time and then they hire like former head coaches on their staff to like guide them a little bit. It was kind of that way with Brad Holmes, who I worked with for just a little bit in the St. Louis Rams.
I love Brad. That's my dude. Right
Brad is such a good guy, by the way. Yeah. Lions fans are ecstatic to have him, and they should be. Okay. So if we can again do some dot connecting. John Dorsey and his last season in Kansas City, what happened? They made the move for Patrick Mahomes to sit him 1 year in what they knew was going to be Alex Smith's final year on the Kansas City Chiefs. We even heard from Jared Goff himself that the team in the Lions and Brad Holmes has rebuffed any contract extension talks in order to have flexibility in that contract. A contract right now that after this year has 0 guaranteed money attached to it. They would say basically 29 of $32 million. Okay. So if we talk about the right time to make a big move for the future of your franchise for a team that is drafting in the top 6, not by their own accord.
As a bonus.
Exactly. Yeah. And when you're good enough and favorites in your division right now to never, in your eyes, draft again in the top 10, Now is the time to make a move when you don't even have to play Anthony Richardson that first season.
Right. I love that line of thinking. I'll give you one thing, though. You might not even get to 6. Because, I mean, if you're John Schneider in Seattle, this is foreign territory for you. And if you have no designs on being up here again, and when you're up here, whether you're up here by your own accord, because usually when teams are up here, Arizona's the exception. Usually when you're up this high, it's because you need a quarterback. It's probably why you're typically so bad. And so if you're this bad, you need a quarterback. Obviously, that's job one. If you're up here because you're Seattle or Detroit and you made brilliant trades,
time to take a swing.
Just because we'll get to Aaron Rodgers in a second. Or you just mentioned Kansas City. That's the way to do it. It's like if I go to the grocery store, Josh, I'm not going to the grocery store. I'm buying milk whether I need it or not. I'm buying bread whether I'm out or not, because I'm going to need it. It's like if you got a quarterback you like, get him. So when it's time when you need him, he's already ready. That's why the Packers have done this right twice already, and we'll see if they do it a third time with Josh Love. So I love Richardson landing in Detroit or Seattle for that matter. But I love what you alluded to just now with your dot connecting. You're so good at that. And drawing these connections between front office members or members of the coaching staff and players. What are some of your favorites from this class where when you're mocking a player to a certain place, you're like, oh, okay, this guy's here. This is wide receiver coach, or this guy was in this front office. Like, what are some of your favorite connections?
Yeah, let's talk about one of those. So obviously the Los Angeles Chargers need pass catcher help. That could be at wide receiver, that can be at tight end. But in the 20s, that can be difficult, right? Because right now they're picking at 21 to know exactly who's going to be on the board. Jordan Addison was committed to Maryland. Maryland's wide receivers coach then moved on to Pitt. So obviously Jordan Addison follows him to Pitt. And then that wide receiver coach goes on and becomes, prior to, I believe, last season, it might have been even earlier than that, but last season, to be the wide receiver coach for the Los Angeles Chargers. And then we see, obviously, Jordan Addison transfer over to USC for his final year. So I have been told that, well, one, this is just a small receiver class. You know this, Mike. Where
everybody's little.
They're all mighty mice, right? And so teams are going to have to change their parameters versus the 195 to 225 pound wide receivers that they've had in their past. But you can easily see a team, especially the Chargers, with the connections that they have, to expand those thresholds to someone like Jordan Addison. So that is one, right? And it certainly fits a need. The other one, and I can't remember where I read this, but the Steelers and their outside cornerbacks are a major need. Deonte Banks was in the same exact draft and recruiting class, I should say, as Dino Tomlin, who is obviously Mike Tomlin's son. And so it wouldn't be shocking at all if,
because everybody's going Joey Porter Jr. Everybody's using that connection, thinking that an ex-Steeler, grade his son. It's another guy's son that might be the connection to look out for.
And to be honest with you, I do try to look at past processes for all these teams. It helps when, it's the same decision makers for 3 to 5 to 10 years. We don't get it that often in the NFL, but the Steelers are one of these teams who really like to have complete visits where their head coach, acting general manager, goes and either has the player in for a visit and travels to their pro day. I think in the last 11 years, the Steelers have not spent a first-round pick on a player where Mike Tomlin and or the acting GM has not attended their pro day, which is very interesting. To the other side of that coin, that got me in trouble last season, where you look at Ron Rivera and Marty Herney have attended every single first-round picks pro day dating back to their time together at the Carolina Panthers. They attended Ohio State with wide receivers. So I assumed it was going to be Chris Olave. And then they just took Jahan Dotson out of nowhere. So sometimes this process can come back to bite you. But I think that there are little breadcrumbs that we hear, because it doesn't just end at the draft for me, Mike. I go back and watch all of these post-draft press conferences as well, because these coaches and GMs are elated and are the most honest they'll ever be all season long. And they kind of give you a peek in the keyhole or pull back the curtain a little bit on like why they liked a guy or when they fell in love, or if he was a complete process. You can kind of pick up buzzwords as well. And so for a bunch of these long-standing general managers and head coaches, you kind of get a better read on their process after the draft than you do before the draft. And you can use that for the next year.
I'm loving you dropping little nuggets. Now, be careful not to give away too many trade secrets, but dropping little nuggets about your process. How did you arrive at your methodology for mocking?
I've just been obsessed with the NFL draft since a young age, probably like you, and it wasn't just the NFL draft at the time. It was the NBA draft. I mean, I remember when there was Saturdays and Sundays, and my elementary school had like this like activity fair on the same day, and I just skipped it and sat inside. I remember the Panthers. I grew up in Charlotte. The Panthers taking Chris Winkie and being like, "Oh man, this is great." But it starts all the way when the Panthers came to Charlotte when I was 7 in 1995, and then I just became obsessed with the draft for this same reason. It might be the same thing that you did, and it's because it's like the one week where a team's future is like drastically changed, and just trying to pick up on exactly and things that a player did well in college if they work at the NFL level. And like if strengths can turn or weaknesses can turn into strengths, the strengths can get stronger, all of that. So it almost started for me as like trying to be a scout and evaluating obviously players as individuals and again, where they succeeded. And obviously the mock drafting kind of just took a turn and has worked out in that department as well. But it really is just trying to find people like me who were obsessed with a single team for a very long time. Because sometimes I feel like the fans that are fanatic about a team for a decade plus have a better read and gauge of what that team is going to do than someone in the national media or an insider. Let's put it that way.
Your fans would hate me for even asking this question. I'm sure you get asked all the time. And you're doing such great work with Underdog Fantasy. Any desire to get back into a front office, to get back into an organization as you once were with the Rams?
Well, okay. Let me explain what the Rams thing is, because I rarely talk about it. I had a cup of coffee with them, basically.
That's more than most of us, Josh. I mean,
I was a scouting intern heading into the 2010 season, and that was Sam Bradford's rookie year. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then I was fortunate enough to work in their scouting department for the NFL draft in 2011. So that was the lockout year, if you remember. And that was the Cam Newton, Von Miller, J.J. Watt, Aldon Smith. And that was also the first year that it was like 3 different nights. And it was hectic, and I learned a ton, and we can get into a few of those stories. But I would also add that doing that is what allowed me to get this job in media, because I was a bit of a rat. I'll tell you, I was at the time, my buddy Evan Silva, just tweeting with him and sharing some messages back and forth. I went into the Rams bathroom, sat on the floor, and texted potential draft picks that they could have at number 14 overall, when it ended up being Robert Quinn, just to have an in with the guy in the media who eventually gave me my first job at NBC Sports. So it's kind of like this whole roundabout era. To answer your question, no, I am perfectly happy with what I'm doing now. I'm totally happy with doing it.
And you're just so good at it. That's what I meant more than anything. Not that you weren't happy, because clearly you are, because of the passion that you bring to it. There's one more player I want to hit with you.
Yeah.
I get Bijan Robinson as a second coming. And beyond that, he seems like a great kid. And I think back to 2007. The Vikings didn't need Adrian Peterson. They had just signed Chester Taylor from Baltimore. And they ended up getting a Hall of Famer.
Yep.
I'm bothered. I'm honestly bothered. That's the word I'm going to use, by the mocking of Bijan Robinson to the Falcons. Because Tyler Algier, by so many metrics, was outstanding last year, especially toward the end of the draft, end of the season. I beg your pardon. What's the purpose of drafting a running back late? Having that running back hit for 1,000 yards on almost 5 yards a carry at 20, now 23 years old, and then go and spend yet another top 10 pick on a skill position guy, even if he's generational, it just doesn't make a lot of practical sense to me. As great as Bijan Robinson, projects to be, you can find running backs late, not Bijan Robinson's, but you found a running back. That's the point of drafting running backs late, is to get a Tyler Algier. Are you buying the Bijan to the Falcons hype?
It's a great question. There's a couple points I make. The first one is this draft might be different than others, where Bijan's talent grade is so much higher than the next closest player on the board that teams, I think this year, are going to look at it and say, hey, we can't just whiff in round one. And like, there's a chance that we might, if we take one of these pillar position guys that is a full half point grade lower than what Bijan is, but that might happen in the teens. That shouldn't happen in the top 10, like what you're saying.
Yeah.
The other side of that, and I'm not the only one that has heard this, Bijan's grade apparently with the Falcons is astronomical. Okay. That is through the phone line what I heard yesterday. One other point. I don't know if, and I understand Kyle Pitts, if I can use this term of adoration, counts because he's an alien, but they also took a tight end the earliest of anyone has ever taken a tight end ever. So we're in year 3 of Arthur Smith. I can't tell you exactly what an Arthur Smith offense is, because it was different with Matt Ryan, then different with Marcus Mariota, and different with Desmond Ridder once he came in. And so if he feels like, okay, this trio of Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and Bijan is good enough for me to keep my job in year 3, which we are right now with Arthur Smith, it might be worth doing for him. I wouldn't do it, but it might be worth doing for him.
And they want to run the ball a lot, and Tyler Algier can't carry them all, and not to mention what Bijan can do in the passing game. All right, I full disclosure, full transparency. I traded for Tyler Algier this offseason in Dynasty, so I'm a little pissed. So should I try to move Tyler Algier in the next couple of days? A little Dynasty advice real quick. Should I try to move him?
No, I think you wait it out. I mean, unless you want to sell high and someone's willing to take.
But they know why I'm selling. But they know why I'm selling. I don't think I can sell high at this point. It's too late, maybe.
I think you're in a good spot with him, because look, I mean, think of how difficult it is to nail exactly what a team is going to do, and if they don't take Bijan, then Algier is perfectly set up.
Oh, I'm sitting pretty.
You're sitting pretty. So no, I wouldn't change a thing. You're doing wonderfully, Michael.
Yeah. Thank you. Speaking of sitting pretty, last thing I got for you, most important thing I got for you, and I appreciate your time, Josh. You are somebody's number 1 overall pick. You are somebody's franchise player. You are about to tie the knot June 3rd. And what I respect about that date, see, what you don't know about me is my oldest 2 kids are both born in May. That's not accidental, Josh. Okay?
We've talked about
this. That's not accidental. That is not accidental. So I appreciate that you set this. I mean, I know June is a popular month for weddings anyway, but June 3rd. So I guess I wonder, what kind of groom are you? What kind of, because have you even been able to be like, hey, what color? Whatever. I don't care. What should we serve? Chicken, I don't know. Like, are you even present for the wedding planning process, given how invested you are in this process?
She has done a wonderful job. Let's put it that way. I could have been a much more.
She knows who she's marrying.
Active. You know what's funny about this, and not to bring it all the way back to where we started, but when I broke that record in 2021 for the mock draft, I thought it was like a huge deal, And she was like, "Well, did you win anything?" Because, I work for Underdog, right? I work for Underdog, where we literally gave away $2 million to a first place winner of fantasy football last year, another $1 million the year before. We're going to do way more than that this year. And so she knows that, like, people who play our little games, as she calls them, win millions of dollars. And so when I did the best ever in something, she asked what I won, and I told her a big fat 0. So I think you're right, where yesterday when I was on the phone for like 5 hours and she was sitting about 15 feet away from me, I just get a text halfway through being like, this is male gossip, what you are doing. This is male gossip. And to answer your question about the wedding, I'm very much looking forward to catching up with a lot of 5th and 6th reminder emails that might just be sitting unread in my inbox at this moment in the month of May. I still have 3 weeks to make up for it.
I'm sure you will. You outkick your coverage, I'm sure. She sounds lovely, at least keeping you humble. But listen, next time she asks you, what did you win for the greatest mock draft of all time? Tell her universal respect.
Okay.
Universal respect. Something you cannot put a price tag on. People, if you haven't already, subscribe to Underdog Fantasy's YouTube channel. It is priceless. Josh Norris, appreciate you, man. Give a hello to Hayden for me and the rest of the team over at Underdog. I cannot wait to talk to you again, man, and can't wait to see your final mock draft Wednesday at midnight and whether you break your own record. Brother, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, we got to do this again. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Let's definitely do it again. All right, man. Take care. Hey, thanks so much for kicking it with your main man, Michael Smith. Be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel, but also subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Rate it, review it, tell your friends about it. Oh, and be sure to follow me on social media.